Do athletes keep going back to abusive situations? Not necessarily, unless they feel like there's no way out, or if it's their only way to help them reach their goals. There always is a way out, and there always is other ways to reach your goals. You do not have to stay in an abusive situation. There's always another way.
This is Running for Real, the podcast for runners who know that for every runner's high, there are just as many lows. All those just missed PRs, easy runs that feel hard, injury blues, and more. Each week, we'll talk to running, health, and wellness experts about their highs, lows, and best advice to build our confidence. Running for Real is about being honest, being brave, and most of all, not feeling alone. And now here's our host, Tina Muir.
Hello, my friends. Welcome to episode 177 of the Running for Real podcast. Thank you so much for joining me. I know there are millions and more joining every day of podcasts that you could be listening to. So I truly appreciate you coming to join me today. And this is one of those episodes, kind of gets us back to basics, gets us back to kind of the foundations of running for real, in that love to kind of get to know running, understand it a bit better, get to know the real brains of the sport. And that is why I wanted to bring on my guest today. But before I get to that, just to tell you, last week we had Liza Howard on the show, who has kind of created a bit of a storm in the running world because of what she's been able to do as a masters athlete. She also juggles a full-time job with her kids, squeezing in training. She's been known to do up to, I can't remember now, was it either 40 or 50? I think it was 40-mile runs on a treadmill, which I just can't even wrap my brain around. And she's just all around a wonderful person within the ultra running world. I've heard her mentioned many times as just this wonderful, beautiful person. And we got to see that last week. So if you missed that episode with Liza Howard, if you are particularly a masters runner, you are definitely going to enjoy that one. Now, today, as I mentioned, we are going to be focusing on kind of the science, the research aspect of things, which is why I wanted Margo Mountjoy on the show. Margo was recommended to me by Trent Stellingworth, whose opinion and thoughts I really recommend, and he's told me nothing but good about Margo, so I knew I wanted to have her on. She has done a lot. She's also been a lead author in the RED-S consensus, or the REDS consensus. So she's really been one of the key players in kind of getting the wording out, getting the science out about REDS, which, as we know, is very common and is a very serious problem, and does not just include women, it is men too. So, we had Dr. Gaudiani talking about this a few months ago, but Margo was one of the key people here who was kind of pushing it forward. She also works on a lot of international committees, including the World Doping Agency, and she works on the International Olympic Committee and the Games Group. So lots of expertise, and also has an interest in harassment and abuse in sport, which is very appropriate right now, kind of a good conversation to get into. So I am not going to give too much more away. I am just going to say that we are just going to thank our sponsors for this episode. Then we'll be right to it. Thank you to Athletic Greens for sponsoring this episode of the Running for Real podcast. You've heard me talking about it. Athletic Greens is the ultimate daily all-in-one supplement with 75 vitamins, minerals, and whole food source ingredients that work together to help the body absorb and synthesize these nutrients in this bioavailable form. It was developed for athletes and high performers, but it has since been used across the board. People love it. Just one scoop in a glass of water or in a jug of water delivers adaptogens, antioxidants, prebiotics, probiotics, and this superfood complex that helps support the body's nutritional needs across the critical areas of health. It really has been the most comprehensive nutritional supplement that I've ever come across. I take it every single morning. If I don't take it, I get really paranoid that I'm going to get sick or that something's going to go wrong. So I have it's become part of my life. I cannot imagine my life without it. I haven't fallen sick in a while despite traveling a lot. It gives me this peace of mind that I'm getting comprehensive nutrition that supports this crazy lifestyle that I'm living. And realistically, we know the perfect diet doesn't exist. I'm definitely not the best right now during pregnancy at getting that in, but even just in general, it's way too easy when you do kind of keep trying to get that perfect diet to head down a dangerous path. I know I've been down, many of you have been down too, but this is one way, you know, you can make sure you're getting what you need. You can also try and eat healthy, but also try and eat enjoyable foods too. You don't have to let your diet control your life. This is a great way to start your day. It's just done. You feel good. You feel confident. I actually find that it doesn't make me want as hot drinks as much anymore. So maybe you can cut down on your coffee with it. And also, if you have a big race coming up, you do not want to get sick a few days before the race. And this is going to help build your immune system. So hopefully you can keep those nasty little bugs away and stopping you from sabotaging your race. So you can get a $79 value travel pack for free. That's 20 servings of athletic greens for free when you sign up for your first month. You can do this at tinamuir.com/athletic greens. Give it a try. I absolutely love it and can't imagine my life without it. In fact, I actually the other day got a bit nervous if they ever went out of business, what I would do. Not that they're anywhere near that or anything. I really can't imagine my life without athletic greens because I just really have adapted it and just love it in my life. I feel so confident with it. So go to athleticgreens.com/Tina to get yourself a free $79 value 20 serving travel pack with your first month. Margo, thank you so much for joining me today on the Running for Real podcast. I am really excited to pick your brain. You've got so many different areas that you are interested in, that you know about, that we haven't ever covered before. So I'm excited to bring you on and thank you for coming on the show today.
Thank you for inviting me and for highlighting some of these key important areas on athlete health and safety.
No, I appreciate that. And I also want to give a thanks to Trent Stellingworth for introducing us, because as much as I had seen your work, I'm not sure I would have had the confidence to reach out to you or known how to find you without him. So just want to thank Trent there. All right. So, you know, looking at your bio, just general bio that you have at the McMaster, is that how you say it? McMaster?
Yes, that's my university. Yeah.
University website. You have a lot of these accolades. There's a lot of things that you've done. And one that my audience might be interested in is that you are the lead author of the Red S Consensus. We're going to go into that a little bit later, but I kind of want to go into you a little bit first, being that you started off you spent time as a international level athlete in synchronized swimming.
Yes, I was just going to say you're absolutely right. I was a synchronized swimmer, which is now known as artistic swimming.
Yeah, I saw that when I was researching you. When did that change?
It changed 2 or 3 years ago.
Okay.
Around 2017 or so.
And what was the reason for that?
I think it was really alignment and marketing. I mean, synchronized is maybe not such an easy word to translate into other languages. And artistic aligns with artistic gymnastics, artistic skating, and it connotes the artistic component of the sport, which is, you know, there's power, there's strength, and there's physical agility in artistic swimming, but in addition, there's the artistic component of the music and interpretation and creativity. So I think that was really the main reason.
So on that note, that actually ties in nicely to what I was going to ask you about that. Like, for most people, when synchronized swimming comes to mind, they're going to think of some ladies wearing swim caps, kind of having the lovely swim around in a circle and kind of gracefully kind of, you know, glancing back to like 1950 when, you know, housewives would go to the pool and do this. But being at that kind of level, and just any sport really in general, you have to work very hard. It takes, as you said, a lot of strength, a lot of power, a lot of thought to kind of get to that level. So maybe kind of break that myth for people who think that, you know, synchronized swimming or artistic swimming is just splashing about in the pool.
Well, you're absolutely right that the origins of artistic swimming do stem back to the 1950s Esther Williams movies, but that's where that style and kind of activity in the water ends and the sport takes over. I encourage anyone with that impression of artistic swimming to actually watch more recent performances at World Championships, World Series, World Cups, and Olympic Games. And what you'll see is not remotely similar to the Esther Williams movies, although, of course, it is in water. And that's about where the similarity ends, because the sport now has men. We have mixed duets, hopefully soon to have mixed teams. The sport is very much one of strength, power, high-risk stunts, and as well maintaining the artistic side of synchronization to each other, to the music, and interpretation of the music. These women are incredible athletes and men. They work very hard. They have trained long hours at high intensities. They're incredibly fit, have great aerobic and anaerobic capacity and training loads, in addition to their flexibility, agility, and artistic abilities.
And so what attracted you to that when, there's hundreds of sports you could have chosen. So how did you end up there?
Well, I was a swimmer, and I think a swimmer and a dancer. So this was really just a way for the two of them to come together. And it just was an interesting, it just interests me. And certainly I enjoyed the training, the camaraderie of teamwork. I enjoyed traveling around the world with these, at the time it was only women in the sport. And it was really a thrill of my lifetime as an athlete to participate in the sport, as high demanding and difficult as it was. It was really quite an honor to be part of sport at this level.
And was that what kind of perked your interest in athletes and looking at how they, aspects of what helps athletes to perform, or did that come at a later time?
That's a very interesting question, and certainly it would be logical that my sporting career would inspire me to become a sports physician, but in fact, it didn't. When I left artistic swimming and retired, I moved on to medical school, because at the time it was impossible to keep up a high-level training and undertake medical school at the same time. So I left my sporting life for my next chapter, which was my career in medicine. And it wasn't until I was finished med school and training in my residency that I incidentally fell into sport medicine, and the rest is almost history at that point, when I knew that was, really marrying the two loves of my life, which is helping people feel better and prevent illness and injury, and focusing particularly on sport and athletes and promoting physical activity for health and well-being. That's when these things came together. And then the absolute rest is history, because I devoted my career in medicine towards those goals.
Yeah. And you're obviously a hard worker. You wouldn't get to an international level at any sport as an athlete without kind of showing that. And as you said, going to med school, now being an associate clinical professor, being a regional assistant dean, a clinical scientist, sports medicine physician. You have all these titles and things, there's many more that I haven't even mentioned. But what drives you to keep seeking out these opportunities, like to keep growing, to keep wanting to be the best at, or the best that you can at whatever it is you're doing?
That's also a very interesting question. I'm not sure that it's driving me to try and be the best that I can, as much as I see a need in an athlete population, and that's what drives me to do what needs to be done. Actually, I really don't think it has anything to do with me trying to be the best at what I can be. I'm driven by responding to a need and working at the hardest of my capability and connecting with people that have other skills that I don't have, to work together to make things happen, so that together we can improve athlete health and well-being. That's what drives me, really not anything personal. A lot of my international work is volunteer work. My husband and I laugh at that. We'll never be able to retire because I do so much volunteer work internationally, and that's what drives me. It's not financial, it's not personal. It's so that I can improve things for us.
And is it you've got to know athletes and kind of seen their pain points and wanted to know what you could do, or like how did you kind of, you say it's for the other athletes?
Sure, some of it's driven by my clinical practice. I mean, I've worked in sport medicine for over 30 years, and at recreational level, master's level, and significant international Olympic level athletes as well. So I do see the need in athlete populations, but I also see the need from being at World Championships, Olympic Games, looking at maybe a bird's eye level at some systems that need changing, policies that need changing, rules that need changing, that affect things at the grassroots level with a trickle-down effect. So it's more than just sort of affecting one person at a time with my hands-on care, but changing systems and rules and hopefully cultures and attitudes to try and improve even, in tangential ways that I will probably never be aware of, and hoping that there'll be a ripple effect in many ways. So hence our podcast today, that perhaps some of the work that I do with colleagues from around the world will bring benefit to one of your listeners.
Yeah, I'm sure many of my listeners, and I want to ask a question that's completely off topic, but someone mentioned it to me in just a minute, but people who are listening who maybe are in an academic field and might have to work on a project with someone like you, someone who's very experienced, and they might feel like they're not good enough in their work or in something. They're feeling that imposter syndrome. This person's so experienced. They're on so many boards. They're in so many organizations. What would you like to say to those, people in the industry, be it whatever industry it may be, in the medicine field? Maybe this person is 37 years old because they've gone through med school and everything, and they're just starting to get onto research projects. Or maybe it's someone in their early 20s who is working on things in their career. What would you say to that person who's kind of struggling looking at people like you who have all this experience and knowledge?
Well, I would really encourage those people to keep acting and believe in themselves, because any little bit that you can do, even one-on-one with athletes or with a team, it's important. And it is meaningful. I got back from the Christmas, New Year holiday and received a handwritten note from one of the athletes that I look after in the clinic. They're elite level, but international level, but still a low developmental level. It was a handwritten note thanking me for the care I gave them, and that was a one-on-one contact. And that, to me, almost meant more than the publication of the two papers I had over the holidays. So those things aren't little. The day-to-day work that you do is very important and affecting and touching people. And every project that you do or paper that you publish, it's really important. And believe in yourself. I didn't actually start my PhD till I was over the age of 50. And so, if you want to do something, just do it. Follow your passions. And if there's an open door for an opportunity where you can affect change, walk through that door. And you don't figure, I don't know if I can do it. Walk through the door and say, how can I do this?
Love that.
And if I can't do it, who can I find to work with me so that together we can accomplish this, because there's a need.
Love that. Thank you so much. And does it ever feel exhausting within the realm of athletes, within the realm of performance? Like you're kind of chasing tails, one thing you figure out and then something else comes up?
Well, there's always a need. That's why there's so many competent people in sport medicine and sport science. And we're ever so grateful for the team of experts around the world in their various fields that are doing things. So, I'm not someone who's going to solve all the problems in the world. I'm going to work together with colleagues to make a difference in what I can. So I don't feel overwhelmed. I don't get frustrated in that regard at all. I just see opportunities to make change and help. A little frustrating at times is sometimes trying to encourage people without scientific knowledge on the importance of changing culture, attitude, and rules, because the people who make those decisions aren't necessarily science or medicine and may not always have the athlete best interest in their hearts. They should. That's not always the case, and that can be frustrating at times, but that's where I must remind myself, and if anyone else listening, if they're in these positions, you must remain patient and wait for the opportunity. And at one point in time, the opportunity will arise you must act immediately when the opportunity is there. Don't wait for another day, because it won't come, or it might not come.
Yeah, great. Thank you. Such good advice there. And next I wanted to ask you a bit about working with the Olympics, having, spent time working with the IOC, the International Olympic Committee, in the Games Group. Tell us a bit about that behind the scenes. What was it like working with the Olympics? Well,
it's a personal thrill of a lifetime as well. Professional thrill of a lifetime. It didn't just happen overnight. It took years of work to get to that point. Started off doing community events and then working with the artistic swimming team provincially, nationally, then traveling with Team Canada at the time, And then I made the leap to work with FINA, which is the sport governing body, International Federation of Aquatics. And from there, I was then promoted to the IOC Medical Commission as the summer sport rep. So that's my journey. It's not something that just happened one day. There was a calculated path. I don't say that was my goal at the time, but there was a path, and that was how it went. How is it? It is very thrilling. It is an honor and a pleasure, and every project that I do with the IOC, I'm just reminded of how lucky and fortunate I am to be in a position where I can activate groups of experts from around the world to work together with the support of the IOC President Thomas Bach, the IOC Medical Commission Chair, Edner from Turkey, that these people really do believe that athletes' health and well-being is very important, and they will put money, resources, and activate, manpower in different ways to help promote athlete health and well-being. And it really is a professional and a personal thrill.
Good. So just to kind of add to that, there's been some negative kind of press around the IOC and about kind of the intentions and the thoughts behind things. And I know you're obviously not going to know the budgeting side of things or anything like that, but, is there anything else you want to add to just show people that, they really are doing the best that they can, and, nothing's going to be perfect. There's always going to be things to improve, but from your perspective, it seems like you think they're doing the best. From my perspective, and I can't and won't comment on anything in the press because I'm not quite sure what you're referring to. However, from my perspective, working in healthcare and athletes in the medical side of things, there is the intention, the will, and the follow through to support athlete health through at games initiatives and outside of the games, in between games, through various health projects and programs that are being investigated, developed, policies made, and financial and educational support for physicians and sport organizations around athlete health and well-being. That's my reality working with the IOC. I'm very happy to be there working with experts from around the world, and I've learned so much from them. Yeah, that's awesome. Great. Thank you. And then what about, you've also have been working or are still working as a part of the World Anti-Doping Agency. So tell us about that, that again, or even more so, there's a lot of negativity around sport right now about getting to a future where we are out ahead of cheats, are able to kind of detect things. From what you have seen, do you see it being possible that we can have a future that does look that way?
So, great questions, and certainly very topical. My work in the World Anti-Doping Association comes from, really is just an extension of my work at trying to promote athlete health and well-being, because an athlete who is being either forced or personally chooses to dope has health risks to that. And on top of that, the integrity of sport is negatively affected by that. So my athletes that are clean, that compete against athletes that are doped, it's unfair. So that's not good. So my work in anti-doping is really just an extension of the other work that I do in other areas.
Thank you to Janji for supporting me and this episode of the Running for Real podcast. You have heard me talking about them for months now. I am so excited that we are going to be continuing our relationship going into 2020, and I could not be more proud of that. I find the need to slip Janji into conversations all the time, just because I feel so proud of what they stand for and what they do. They give 5% of donations back to clean water nonprofits in the countries that they are taking the inspiration from for that season, the country they are using for that inspiration for that season. They also work with a local designer so that person gets to create a design that is going to represent their country, and people will wear it all over the world, which I just think is so special and cool, and it makes their designs really unique and just colorful, and I absolutely love it. And they have some very exciting things coming for 2020. The clothes are also comfortable, they are enjoyable to wear, and many of the materials are recycled, which also makes me feel good with the environmental thing, because we need to give back in any way that we can. We're all going to make mistakes. We're all going to not be perfect when it comes to trying to solve this problem. But at the end of the day, all the little changes we can make, the better. And I love that Janji has made that a priority for them. So if you use code TINAMUIR at checkout, that's TINAMUIR at janji.com, that's JANJI, you will get 10% off your order. You can give them a try. Let me know what you think. All of the products I've tried, I have loved, but I really would recommend for the women giving the tights a try, or the shorts, I suppose, for men or women. The tights and the shorts are some of my favorite things that I love to wear from them. So give them a try and let me know what you think. You really will love them. And I hope you enjoy the patterns and just the meaning behind those patterns. So thank you so much to Janji for supporting this episode.
My athletes that are clean that compete against athletes that are doped it's unfair. So that's not good. So my work in anti-doping is really just an extension of the other work that I do in other areas. I can't comment on World Anti-Doping Association's policies and decisions making because I'm not a WADA politician. I'm not on the executive board or the foundation board. I'm a member of the Health, Medicine, and Research Committee. And before that, I was a member of the Therapeutic Use Exemption Committee. So my work really is around the health research projects, medical projects, and that aspect of anti-doping. I also work for World Rugby on their anti-doping advisory committee, and I sit on a judicial panel with them where I help educate athletes, work in prevention, and also try cases for the World Rugby.
So you're saying a lot of it is kind of basically trying to convince athletes don't go down that path.
Well, that's the prevention side. There's the prevention and deterrence. And the prevention side is education, outreach, and communication about the risks and the benefits of proper nutrition and training for performance rather than cheating. Mm-hmm. And then there's the deterrence side, which is testing and management of cases.
And, you mentioned at the beginning of that, when you were talking about this, that there are some, side effects physically with people that don't. What are some of those? Well,
there's many, and it depends what substance the athlete is taking, of course.
So like long-term things people could be,
anabolic steroids, they're well-known effects, and anyone who's on them, I'm sure, is familiar. There's a change in, if a woman's on them, of masculinity, and change in fertility. In men, there can be changes in testicular size. There can be changes with liver tumors. There can be quite serious effects. There's roid rage, as people say, where there's psychological side effects. The stimulant can have cardiac side effects, death. There's been athletes that have died from amphetamine overuse. Blood doping is often done in someone's kitchen, and so there's problems with blood reactions and infections from bad practices. Taking a strong hormone like erythropoietin to stimulate blood development is not a normal physiological thing to do, and there's potential health repercussions from that. So, there's far too many to get into it in a discussion like this, but certainly you pick your drug, and you can find the health risks to that. There are many.
Yeah. All right. So, next, another area that you have a lot of expertise in, which is, again, topical, is the field of harassment and abuse in sport. Now, for someone listening, most of my listeners are just recreational athletes who, have no desire or physical capability of reaching that elite level. And they might be thinking, why is there a need for that? What does that mean, harassment and abuse in sport?
Well, sport is really a microcosm of society, and we know in society that there are parts of society that are bad, where there is people that harm other people in many different ways, either through psychological abuse, through physical abuse, from neglect, withholding, nurturement, fluids, things like that, and also from sexual abuse. So sport is not immune to these things, and in fact, in many cases, sport can be a catalyst with being a unique culture where there are different checks and balances often, where there's a power relationship and differential between people in leadership, coaches, leadership, peers even, where there's that power differential, it can happen. And it can happen at any level of sport, and it happens in all sports, and it happens around the world. So even if you are not an elite athlete, it can happen in your own sport organization. And I think it's fairly clear to me, who's worked in the field for many years, that the health and both physical and psychological consequences from abuse and harassment, be it inside or outside of sport, can be very detrimental for an individual, and they can be long-lasting well beyond the period of time of the harassment and abuse.
Yeah.
It can extend lifelong in some cases. And so for something that has such serious health and well-being consequence, it's something that I needed to act. I saw an athlete punched in the face by a coach when I was a junior. I'd been in practice just a couple of years. I was very new to the sports system that I was working in, and I was powerless to act and protect that athlete. And I felt so uncomfortable at the time that I said to myself, I will do something about this somehow one day. And it was another 12 years before I had the opportunity at the International Olympic Committee to lead the original IOC consensus statement on, at that point, with sexual harassment and abuse in 2006, published in 2007.
Mm-hmm. And, from that moment right there, seeing that, I think that's, a good example of, we all have things in our lives that touch us, and, we all kind of experience things that aren't nice, and we see things that aren't ideal or make us feel uncomfortable, but there's certain things that really kind of hit you hard in the heart, and you want to do something. And, I think that's a good lesson for us all, that it took you 12 years, but you kind of made that promise to yourself that you were going to do something to limit that as much as you had the power to do. And so, I think that's a good lesson for us all to hear, because we all have those things, but we might kind of, think about them from time to time, but kind of never really act upon them. So thank you for the younger you for kind of sticking that in your brain enough to actually do the research and help us learn about this, as well as, thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions of people around the world.
Well, thank you. And I think it's really important as a take-home message for your listeners. If it doesn't feel right, it probably isn't right.
Yeah.
So then you should act. You should reach out for help. You should go to somebody. And most sports organizations, hopefully now, have harassment and abuse policies and procedures. There should be someone that you can speak to inside your sport organization, and if not, someone outside of your sport organization that you can speak to, who can activate help by stopping whatever it is that's happening and giving you support.
Mm-hmm. So I'm assuming that you've kind of heard about the Mary Cain, kind of Alberto Salazar kind of emotional abuse that came about the last few months. Tell us, is that quite common amongst athletes? And, you mentioned the power dynamic. Is that quite a common thing to happen with kind of an emotional, you have this close relationship? I can say that my husband was my coach, so I definitely understand the, it's a very sensitive thing to be able to walk that line for us. And at one point we were not married. So, we had to kind of deal with that way. But, how common is this to kind of have a relationship? Let's start with that, the power dynamic of the coach athlete. How often does that kind of turn sour or go wrong? Is it quite common?
Well, if we look at, so you're asking me what's the prevalence of coach-athlete harassment and abuse, and it varies from the types of abuse and in the different sport organizations. So there's a recent Canadian study that differentiates psychological abuse from physical abuse from sexual abuse, and physical abuse is fairly high, as is psychological. Sexual abuse is lower. But it's not always coach-athlete. It's wherever there's a power differential. It can be physician-patient. It can be physician-athlete, Larry Nassar, USA Gymnastics. It can be peer-to-peer. It can be, someone else in the sport organization with the athlete. So it is someone within a power differential, and it's quite often the coach. The coach is more often reported in the literature and in certainly in the media as being a perpetrator than non-coaches. However, peer-to-peer harassment and abuse is also fairly significant.
So that would be kind of just people on a team together?
Sure. The rookie and the senior.
Okay.
or someone who maybe has a higher skill level than someone else, or someone who has better equipment and is a better, more expensive equipment than someone else. There's all kinds of reasons why people have negative relationships towards others that's based on discrimination in a culture that's permissive, where athletes don't have a voice. Yeah. So those are the components that lead to it. There's a power differential base, and every coach-athlete relationship, there's power differentials. But a power differential in a culture that is a healthy culture, and by that I mean where there's checks and balances, where there's good codes of conduct, where there's respectful relationships, is very healthy. I mean, our performances are based on coaches bringing athletes to their best and working together. And the coach-athlete relationship, 99% of the time, is very healthy. It's when there's an unhealthy culture with high perpetrator motivation, poor culture of checks and balances, policies and procedures, and high athlete vulnerability that problems happen. In that culture where abusive behaviors are tolerated, accepted as normal, and where athletes are powerless with no voice. So that's when people run into trouble.
Would you say there's any kind of signs that, someone listening who maybe has moved to a new city and is thinking, I want to join a team, or someone who is in college is looking, or in high school looking at colleges, or, are there certain things that kind of are red flags, maybe when someone's, meeting people on the team or in the group, meeting that coach, that someone should kind of be wary of?
Excellent questions, and certainly, as parents of young athletes, or as just individuals themselves, I think it's important in this day and age to do your homework. You check out the coach to see what their performance history is like. Why not check out the coach as well to say, do you have policies and procedures? What are your qualifications? Do you have codes of conduct in your sport organization? And who's your safeguarding officer? What are your processes and procedures? And all sport organizations should have these.
And so in the case of, Nike Oregon project with Alberto, you mentioned about looking at performance, looking at past, that would have been a gleaming record, one of the best of performance, having maybe qualifications or having things alongside names. And, does that kind of, I don't know, it's difficult to say within running, at least, like if that's always the case, but particularly because running, a lot of running coaches don't have necessarily accolades. They're just kind of known for, they've worked their way up with performances and people and success. So just looking at as an example, Mary Kane, kind of what she experienced, some of the other athletes I've had on, Cara Goucher spoke extensively about kind of what she'd been through and how she was feeling, and this relationship of, this athlete wanting to do anything to be good, to kind of put up with anything to be good. Is there anything you would kind of add to that with, the power dynamic, with the lack of kind of, like you said, policies in place, but maybe that not seeming too abnormal?
Okay, so first off, I'm not an expert in Mary Kane's case. I'm certainly well aware of what her video and reading the New York Times. So I've read as much as you or someone else has, but I'm not privy to any information beyond her allegations in the media. So I won't comment on specifics of the case, but certainly from her story, there's parts of it that we can learn from. And that is, I think, what you've spoken of. She was a young woman who was vulnerable. She was away from home, and she was in a high-powered situation with a very strong, powerful coach. She had concerns, and she states in her story that they weren't listened to and managed appropriately. Again, it's her allegations, and I can't comment on any details, but those are things that we should look out for. I mean, should a 17-year-old youth be in such a high-powered situation and away from home where there's supports, someone to advocate for you, and just a different structure. Yeah.
And, I don't know how much you're going to be able to, if this is something that you have covered, but, or whether you will be comfortable saying anything, but, some people, when she did speak out and kind of say about how she was feeling, and there was a response from Nike saying that she had asked to rejoin the group just 6 months before, some people reacted negatively to that, saying, well, she went back to the group. She obviously, didn't think it was that bad. From your experience and what you've kind of discovered, like, is there something within people who are experiencing emotional, or sexual, physical abuse that they kind of keep going back or kind of keep brushing things under the carpet because even though, like you said, something is wrong, you kind of feel like you're lost without that, whatever it is, that person, that thing, the group?
Yeah, I think it's difficult to comment on this particular case because I'm not really privy to the details of it. But in particular, do athletes keep going back to abusive situations? Not necessarily unless they feel like there's no way out or if it's their only way to help them reach their goals. And I encourage them that there always is a way out and there always is other ways to reach your goals. And you do not have to stay in an abusive situation to obtain your performance goals.
Okay.
There's always another way.
Yep. Thank you. And again, I want to encourage everyone to go back and listen to the Cara Goucher episode. She, spoke to anyone listening who might be kind of going through this and what you can do and how she's willing to help and be that kind of sounding board if you need someone to support you with that. So I want to thank Molly Huddle for this question. She noted that sports where the athletes are younger, like swimming, gymnastics, seem to be more vulnerable than sports that peak kind of as an adult or later in life. Has that kind of been the case? I mean, it seems like, you mentioned Larry Nassar, but a lot of the sports where there are younger athletes within there, it can kind of be a bit tricky and there can be more cases of that. Is that just kind of something that we've maybe noticed, or is there some kind of science or stats behind that?
Okay, so the prevalence shows that sexual harassment and abuse, as well as other forms of harassment and abuse, occur at all levels of sport.
Okay.
So it does happen to adults as well. Now, children are unique relative to adult athletes in that consent cannot be given for sexual interference. They do not have the understanding or the capability or the legal ability to consent to sexual relationships as a child. Children are more vulnerable than adults because they have less of a voice. Mm-hmm. So children are more vulnerable, and certainly child abuse cases garner more media interest and are more sensational, so we hear about them. So it's like in any other part of society, children in a school, children in a church, children in other situations, they are more vulnerable. But it is not only in children in sport.
And how common is sexual, physical abuse? Like, do you have any kind of numbers on what percentage?
Yeah, it varies. It varies in the literature depending on how it's defined and what age group and whatnot is being tested. It ranges anywhere between 2 to 3% and 50 to 70%.
Thank you to ButcherBox for sponsoring this episode of the Running for Real podcast. Now, as you know, I am pregnant right now. I am in the middle of my pregnancy, and there's quite a few food items that I miss. Why is it all the best foods are kept away from us pregnant women? It makes it hard, although it does work out for me well this year because the summer I will have the baby with me. I will be able to eat all the brie I want, all the foods I want. And one thing I love to do is cook a lovely steak on the grill. Having it on the grill is one of my favorite ways to do it in the summer. I just think that's just kind of reminds me of summer and fun, makes me feel good, even right now being kind of colder outside. I love to have an excellent filet mignon. That is something that is not only just hard to say, but is also a delicious cut of meat. And if you're going to have a treat, if you can have a special evening with loved ones, with friends, why not go for that cut of meat? Maybe it has less marbling than a ribeye, but the texture is just so good. Can't wait to have that rare, or medium rare, I should say, steak for myself later in the year. Now, I wanted to tell you today about ButcherBox. ButcherBox ships a curated selection of high-quality meats right to your home. All meat is free of antibiotics and added hormones. Each box has 9 to 11 pounds of meat, which is enough for 24 individual meals. So even if you want someone who has meat every single day, you can push it back and spread it over a period of time. as it is little individual meals which come in a freezer pack. It's packed fresh, shipped frozen, vacuum sealed so that it stays that way, and you can customize your box. You get exactly what you want. You can choose the cuts of meat and the things that you want in there. It's 100% grass-fed and finished. It is free-range organic chicken, heritage pork, wild-caught Alaskan salmon, and bacon that is free of nitrates and added sugar. That's kind of the way meat should be, right? This is the most affordable and convenient way to get healthy, humanely raised meat. And with ButcherBox, you get the highest quality meat for around $6 a meal, which is still pretty good, right? I want to give you a special offer, my friends. You can get 2 filet mignons, a pack of bacon, plus $20 off your first box when you sign up now at butcherbox.com/Tina Muir. That's butcherbox.com, butcherbox.com/Tina Muir. So that's TINAMUIR. Or you can use promo code Tina Muir at checkout. That will give you 2 free filet mignons, a pack of bacon, plus $20 off your first box. So go to butcherbox.com/Tina Muir or use code Tina Muir at checkout.
Yeah, it varies. It varies in the literature depending on how it's defined and what age group and whatnot is being tested. It ranges anywhere between 2 to 3% and 50 to 70%, which is a wide range. And that wide range is probably because of the definition discrepancies between research studies as well as cultural differences in prevalence. There's societies where it's normalized, perhaps a little bit more. We did learn at one point of a sport team in Africa where part of the requirement to join a team was to have intercourse with the coach. And so, you know, that was normalized as behavior to be admitted onto the team. And so that's in a, very tragic story where, in a culture where that was accepted. I'm talking about the culture of the country, the culture of that sport organization. And so it really does vary. A recent study in Canada showed it was around 8 to 10%. There's studies done in retrospect that it shows it's a little bit higher, but people maybe are a little bit more comfortable to disclose after the fact than during the fact.
Yeah, that would make sense. Well, thank you for sharing that. And anything else, you mentioned about kind of vetting things, looking for qualifications, speaking to the coach, maybe speaking to others who have run for the coach or anything like that. Anything else to kind of limit this, prevent it in the future?
I think if people can stick to those principles, they should be fine. And by far, I'd like to just reiterate that most coaches are great people.
Yes.
They devoted their life to working with athletes. They are upstanding, wonderful citizens. They want really what's the best for athletes. They work well with athletes, and they're very safe. So let's not paint coaches as all bad. They're certainly, by far, the majority of them are excellent coaches, and I work with some of the most amazing coaches. And, it's really important to remember that most people are just absolutely terrific, and just be careful and cautious. Keep your guard and make sure that rules are followed in terms of codes of conduct. Don't take a ride home with coach. Don't spend time alone. Don't share your room with the coach. All those kinds of things. They're very important behavioral codes of conduct that most sport organizations should have.
Yeah, great. Thank you. Thank you so much. All right, let's switch gears, talk about something else. So you have, looking at health, looking at performance, done some work with illness, and thinking, someone getting sick or getting an illness at the Olympic Games, can't really get a much worse time in your career to have something happen like that. But, is there anything that can be done? I know, maybe at the top level, there's maybe have access to resources that the average person listening may not. But for someone listening who does happen to get, sick during a race week or has something kind of that they think, is it even worth me participating? I don't feel good. Should I just back out and go for another race? Or sometimes I have to do it either way, which would be maybe the Olympics. You might as well go for it. So what would you say about what you have found with that?
Well, That's a very loaded question.
Sorry.
My first approach to illness around major events, and major is what's major to you in terms of your own personal athletic goals. And that may be Olympic Games, and that might be the 5K that you've been working at for 6 months to do, in a recreational way. So the first thing I say is most important is prevention. And we do know in the science that if you use proper prevention, you can decrease significantly your risk of becoming ill. And by ill, I mean with a contagious viral infection, gastroenteritis, upper respiratory tract infection. And those principles are pretty simple, and I'm sure your mother already taught them to you. Sleep well. Sleep is very good for recovery. It's also very good at improving your immunity. Eating healthy, balanced diet. We know that athletes with relative energy deficiency have changes in their immune system, and they're more susceptible to infections. And we also know that people who hug, kiss, don't hand wash before they eat poor food quality, these kinds of things will increase their risk of infectious disease. Put everyone in a village in wintertime, and you're asking to share the bugs. So it's really important when I work with athletes that they hand wash meticulously before they eat. They hand wash every time they touch a doorknob. They do an elbow bump instead of a handshake. They don't kiss. They kind of, high five and then wash. And then they sleep well, eat very well, make sure their energy balance is good, and follow good nutrition habits. And that really goes a long way for their immunity.
Mm-hmm. And, sometimes it is going to happen. You mentioned in the village, and we have heard in the past of, sometimes it's been food poisoning or something going wrong, but, what do you do if some of your athletes that you're there with at the Olympics do end up getting sick, or like you said, at the Winter Games, there's a sickness going around, once they kind of come down with something, is there really anything you can do?
Well, so that's a very good question. And remember, athletes are human beings, and a virus is a virus, and they don't care whether it's an athlete at the Olympic Games. The virus is a virus, and it's going to affect you much the same as it will anyone else, and it will take probably 7 days to get over that infection like it does everyone else. So the timing is poor. There's lots you can do to help improve your symptoms, and that is sleeping well, drinking lots of fluids, taking something for fever and for pain. If it's a bacterial infection, taking an antibiotic. But athletes are human beings. There's really nothing magic that you can do over and above anyone else. For most infections, of course. If you have vomiting and diarrhea, of course, it's the same as anyone else. It's rehydration and improving the electrolytes and following a specific diet to try and help improve things, and isolating from other athletes so they don't spread it.
Yeah.
So I think the principles of athletes are human beings is the most important one to be followed, and I treat an athlete at the Olympic Games as much as I would anyone in the community that's a non-athlete as well. Okay.
And then related to that, sometimes I've had this happen many times. People may train for a big race, get to the race healthy, do the race, and then a few days later get sick. And it seemed, for me, it seemed to happen quite regularly after marathons. But I've heard of many people kind of experiencing that. Is that something am I just imagining a correlation there, or is there something about kind of, getting through an event?
Not particular. Probably it was that you were at a large event exposed to lots of people, so you were exposed to lots of viruses. Or you maybe flew there or traveled there in public transit or something that you were just exposed to more. You may have been energy deficient at the time or something like that with some changes in your immunity. But, it's probably more the exposure than something about the race itself.
Okay, I guess that makes sense. Thank you. And finally, related to, you mentioned about sleep. I just have to ask this because I know this is what people will be thinking, saying, I'm trying to train hard for my race too, but, I don't have time like elites to sleep 10 to 12 hours a day. I have kids, I have work, I have all these things. What can I do?
Well, go to bed earlier. I quite understand that there's really no substitute for sleep.
Yeah.
And what I say is there's parts of an athlete's day that are really important, and training is extremely important. Recovery post-training of nutrition is really important, and equally important is regular sleep. So, the odd night here and there where you lose some sleep because your child's up all night, or it's your nerves 2 days before the Olympic Games and you're up, it won't really affect your performance. It's chronic lack of sleep that's the problem.
Okay.
And I'm not sure that North Americans really get adequate sleep. And the youth athletes really do need more. So, try and just discipline yourself to go to bed early.
Okay. And, I can ask this as being one of them. You don't really know too much about my history other than what I told you before we started talking. But when I was running at the elite level, I was running 90 miles a week. I was lucky if I got 8 hours, not because I didn't want to. I would try so hard, but I couldn't fall asleep. I would wake up at 4. Now I realize, which we're going to go on to talk about in a minute, a lot of that was probably related to being energy deficient. But for do athletes struggle with sleeping despite their heavy training? And do you have any suggestions for someone who is struggling? The body is tired. I remember feeling so exhausted, particularly after long run days. Those were the days I would struggle to sleep the most. And I didn't feel hungry when I went to bed. I just felt wide awake, and I felt like my brain would just switch on at 4 a.m. What would you say to someone who is, thankfully now my child seems to have cured that in me, but what would you say to someone who is still in that kind of phase?
Yeah, well, 8 hours might be enough for you, and you were trying to get more, and your fatigue might have not been from lack of numbers of hours of sleep. It might have been caused by your energy deficiency. So if you are tired and you are getting 8 hours of sleep every night, look for other reasons for your fatigue. Go see your sport doctor. If you don't have a sport doctor, go see your family doctor and say, I'm an athlete. I'm tired. Is it that I'm in a heavy training block and I need some recovery time? Is it that I have iron deficiency? My ferritin might be low. Do I have a thyroid problem? Is there something going on? Do I have REDS? There's many causes for fatigue in the general population that can also happen in athletes. And in the athlete population, there are more specific things related to training and performance that can cause fatigue. And certainly sleep is an important part of recovery, but there are other things that can cause fatigue as well.
Okay, so let's go on and talk about REDS or REDS. We've gone over this in the past, but maybe just if you could explain for my listeners what that is, and definitely make a point of saying, I want to say this before you start talking, before they switch off. This is speaking to men too. I've mentioned this before, but just because you're a man, no need to switch off now. We could be talking to you too. So, Margo, what would you say about
I think
what it is?
One of the key reasons, inclusion of men, that really drove me to be a leader in changing the term from the female athlete triad to REDS. So REDS stands for Relative Energy Deficiency in Sport, and it's a syndrome that was coined in 2014 as an extension of the female athlete triad that recognizes the same origin of the problem, which is low energy availability, that results in numerous both health and performance detriments. And the health ones are a little bit further advanced in terms of their sciences, and they may be amenorrhea in women, low testosterone in men, bone injuries.
Can I just pause you with the low testosterone in men? Without a man being tested, how would he know? I
think a man knows very well if the testosterone is lagging. They will have fatigue. They will not have their morning erections. They'll have a lower sex drive, and they may have poor sex performance. I think most men know about those things.
Okay. All right. Continue
as much as a woman knows about their periods. So I think, a man may have signs and symptoms, and a good sport physician that's working with male athletes should be asking about those things. How is your sex drive? Do you have those morning erections? Do you have energy? Okay. What is your sex performance like? So testosterone is very important in all of those aspects. There are other physical effects. There's health detriments, and that might be cardiovascular endothelial changes, metabolism changes, psychological changes. There are several. And there are also known performance detriments. That we know that athletes with low energy availability don't respond to altitude training in the same way. We also know that athletes with low energy availability may also not respond to the training stimulus in the same way, and there may be neuromuscular detriments to adaptation as well. So we don't know as much about the performance effects. I'm very excited about exploring these in more detail in the research side of things, but we do know there's both physical health effects as well as performance effects, and we know that it affects males as well as females. And I, for years in my practice, was telling my male endurance athletes that they had the female athlete tried, and they looked at me like I was crazy. And I promise you this is what it is. I just don't have another name that I can tell you. So now I can tell my male athletes, and I have many of them in my practice, unfortunately, with REDS, and it is certainly not as rare as one thought originally.
So, talking about, we've gone over some of the physical symptoms, but despite that, I've still had a really tough time kind of getting across to people, especially to women who maybe have their periods, be it through not actually having a period and just being on birth control, and it being, essentially a withdrawal bleed, or just, it being regular, maybe a short cycle but regular, or a long cycle and regular, but maybe seeing some of the other symptoms but not registering it because the period is viewed so much as the health indicator. What would you say to people listening who, maybe recognize some of those symptoms that you mentioned, but have a regular period and think, well, I'm fine?
Well, first caveat that's extremely important is that a menstrual period that's caused by birth control pill or a hormone IUD is not an indicator of health. Mm-hmm. And so the period then cannot be used as a marker of healthy energy availability. So if I prefer my athletes to not be on the birth control pill because it masks the hypothalamic pituitary ovarian axis, and we can't actually tell whether the body shut down the hormone system because it's being artificially manipulated by the birth control pill. So if the athletes need birth control, then I quite often recommend an IUD, not a hormonal IUD, a copper IUD, because it has no hormones. Now, that's something that athletes should discuss with their doctors and with their gynecologists and see what's best for them. But it's important that you choose a gynecologist that understands REDS and functional hypothalamic amenorrhea, and understands the importance of being able to, first of all, treat that health problem with energy balancing, with appropriate energy provision, and it will reverse with time. So putting someone on the pill, sure, causes a withdrawal bleed, but it doesn't actually treat the problem. It's putting a Band-Aid on it so you don't recognize when the problem is there. So that's the first and foremost important thing to be aware of. I think for the other aspects, if you can't use regular healthy menstruation as a marker of healthy energy availability, there's many other health symptoms that you can monitor for, and I've listed some of them already, and I think it's really important that athletes are just aware of all of their body functions to make sure things seem to be going fine. Another very important one that's a big red flag for people is bone stress injuries. Mm-hmm. Anyone with a stress injury should be at least investigated for REDS.
Even if it's the first one?
Even if it's the first one. Okay. Now, there's other causes of stress fractures than relative energy deficiency in sport. However, many of them are caused by relative energy deficiency in sport.
Okay. And, for someone listening who is, recognizing some of these symptoms, thinking, okay, maybe this is me, I'm recognizing some things, but I don't want to gain weight. I don't want to eat more. What would you say to that person?
Right. It's really, for me, it's not so much about the weight. Mm-hmm. It's about properly fueling your tank so that you have enough gas in your tank to fuel your sport. And if you fuel your sport properly, you will run faster. See, that's the really interesting thing about the performance science that we have. We know that athletes who are energy deficient don't respond to the training stimulus the same as those that are in energy balance. Mm-hmm. A very good study by Van Heest in the U.S. looking at adolescent women in swimming, and they did a 400-meter time trial before training and group of women had all the same training stimulus, so they had the same training program, and a few months later they did the same 400-meter time trial. And these women did categorize into two categories: those women that were ovarian suppressed, reds, and those women that had healthy menstrual cycles, so they were healthy balanced. And the women with healthy menstrual cycles became faster. Well, that's what we hope for. That's what we expect. They do months of training, they should get faster. The women that had ovarian suppression didn't get as fast. Not only did they not get as fast, they actually were slower after the training block. So when I'm working with athletes, I'm not talking about gaining weight. I'm not talking about eating more. I'm talking about let's fuel your sport so you can respond to your training stimulus and get better at what you do.
So you just said not eating more, but how would you?
Well, it might be using more energy-rich foods.
Okay.
Like, I mean, a lot of athletes eat, in some sports, a lot of lettuce. Well, let's add to your lettuce some cheese. Let's add to, bits of cheese. Let's add some nuts to your lettuce. Let's add some vegetables to your lettuce. Let's add salad dressing to your lettuce. So, adding more energy-dense foods. So it's not necessarily eating more. It's eating at the right times of day and eating the right kinds of food that will promote recovery, that will promote energy balance.
Okay.
So it's not about, okay, you got to gain 5 pounds. It's not about the weight. You may gain a little bit, but you will be faster, better than if you were less. You will also feel better, by the way, be healthier. But that's an aside.
Yes. And I can definitely be one of the people that can attest to that, and also say that not only was it very little that it took me, looking back. I mean, I'm pregnant now, so it's different. But when I first fell pregnant, the difference between or when I was, I guess, running again, the difference between my weight when I was running, quote unquote, my best, although now you're making me question whether that was my best. And, let's say a few years later when I did have healthy cycles, it really wasn't much of a difference. And even I don't think it was much of a difference in calories, but it as you said, it is going to make you perform better. It is worth it. And yes, it may be a little bit of weight at the beginning, just from the increase in calories, but no one will notice that. I can tell you that for sure, that people will not be able to tell the difference. When your body finds its healthy weight, it's so minimal, or if it is kind of more drastic because you were kind of limiting more, then it's going to be, you're just going to feel so much more confident in who you are. So there's many more episodes. I'll put links in the show notes to all the previous ones with Dr. Gaudiani, Renee McGregor, Nancy Clark, Jessie and Meg. I'll put all of those in there so you can go listen to those if you do want to learn more about those. Anything else you would add on this topic?
Yeah, I think it's important to note that we do know that there's a certain physique that performs better. Mm-hmm. And then there are times that we may need at the high level of the mature athlete where we need to cycle the physique to a certain body composition for optimum performance. But that's done in the hands of experts and the very few elites under controlled situations where we bring the physique to a maximum performance level. Mm-hmm. And that may mean bringing people into very brief controlled periods of low energy availability for certain cycles in, say, an Olympic cycle. So I just, for those sports science buffs out there that say, there's certain ideal body compositions, there are. And I don't negate that, and certainly I'm involved working with teams to help make that happen. But certainly for the majority of athletes, it's not important to do that. And if it's going to be done, it needs to be done in the hands of experts properly and safely, and can be done very effectively.
Okay, thank you very much for that. All right, and just to wrap up here, I have a question. One of my Patreon members, Sally, would like to know. She says, Dr. Mountjoy has published papers on the female athlete triad, or as we said, we now call it REDS or RED-S, part of which is bone loss. Studies have shown that the most effective type of exercise intervention for femoral neck bone mineral density is progressive resistance training for the lower limbs, while the bone mineral density of the spine improves with weight bearing and resistance training. She said running covers the lower limb aspect, but what are some things you recommend to load the spine and hip area?
My goodness, that's a very well-in-tuned listener that you do have. First of all, femoral neck fractures, stress fractures are very serious. very serious indeed, and they are, as a weight-bearing bone, can be potentially serious. So anyone with a femoral neck stress fracture needs to have expert care. So I think that's really, really important caveat for your listeners to understand. Now, any stress fracture is a concern, of course, but there are certain ones in particular parts of the body that are more concerning, and femoral neck is one of them. We do know that weight bearing and weight loading is important for bone strength, and then so running in particular is one of them. Weight training, resistance training is another. And luckily, as human beings, when we walk, we have gravitational forces through the spine, and these things are really important. However, we have to balance that with increasing load and increasing running in someone who might be energy deficient with unhealthy bones. So my message to your listener really is to seek the advice specifically for your particular case from an expert. It's a little hard for me to sort of say a blanket statement in a podcast like this that really would have all the nuances of the particular case. Weight loading in a bone is very important for strength, but only if the bone is healthy, and you need to make sure that you have the proper substrates to encourage bone improvement, calcium, vitamin D, magnesium. These things are really important in bone health. And what's most important is having energy availability.
Okay. And
having an energy balance.
Okay. All right. Thank you so much. I think we can wrap up here. You said to me before you didn't think we'd be able to talk for 45 minutes an hour. Well,
and here we are.
There we are.
An hour.
I knew that would be the case. And like I said to you, I think we could have easily gone way more. But thank you so much for your wisdom, for all that you do in this world to make it a better place, on behalf of everyone who you've helped, and myself included, being someone who had struggled through something that you did a lot of work towards. So thank you, and I look forward to seeing what things you come up with in the future.
Well, thank you.
My friends, if you have a minute and you could leave a review on your favorite podcast player, Apple Podcasts, iTunes, Stitcher, Overcast, Pocket Cast, Spotify, or whatever else podcast player you use to listen to this podcast, or if you would subscribe to this podcast, you will help me get out in front of new runners to make our tribe even bigger and even better. It might not seem like you as one person can make a difference, but really it helps a lot. And it shows me you appreciate the hard work I put in for those. Thank you so much. Really interesting stuff, right? And I'm so thankful to Margo for coming on to give us her time. And she really does know her stuff in just a lot of areas. I look forward to hearing what she does come up to do in the coming months. There is something that she did tell me about. I'm just not sure whether it's out yet. So stay, if you are able to go follow Margo on social media, go do it, because she does have something very interesting that will be coming out very soon. And I hope you enjoyed that episode just in general, in terms of the conversation, in terms of the things that we could learn. I found that really insightful and fascinating. And her knowledge is just kind of unprecedented. And also I liked what she said about us all kind of continuing to grow and not being afraid to kind of push on, because we all have to get that experience from somewhere. So you can go to our show notes at tinamuir.com/episode 177 to see some of the papers and the research that we talked about today, in addition to the sponsors of this episode, ButcherBox, Athletic Greens, and Janji. Thank you to them for sponsoring this episode. Now, next week, we are going to have Amanda Brooks on the show. Amanda is primarily known for her blog, Run to the Finish, and she does have a book coming out, which is very exciting. She defines and describes herself as a middle-of-the-pack runner, so I think many people listening will resonate with her. She's humorous, and I think you're going to enjoy her. So, my friends, have a great week. I will see you then.
Thanks for listening to the Running for Real podcast. Be sure to check out tinamuir.com for show notes and even more helpful running information.